We are a metaphysical-based New Thought spiritual community, and we welcome and celebrate all facets of life here in our home. And whether that's you're joining us via live stream, hello live streamers. Hello live streamers. Or whether it's live, or you're watching it live or later, or whether you're here in person, or whatever the case may be. The vision statement for our community is supporting individuals finding their personal self-empowerment through a spiritual awakening. So I invite you to hear that anew for yourself today. Supporting individuals finding their personal self-empowerment through a spiritual awakening. Here at the Center for Spiritual Living Los Angeles, much like many other centers for spiritual living across the nation and beyond, we practice the science of mind, the teachings of the science of mind, which is the compilation of many different philosophies and faiths and religions by Ernest Holmes. It was published in a book in the early 1900s. It's considered a foundational component of many New Thought religions that came into being at the turn of the 20th century. And it's a philosophy and a faith and a way of life that believes in one power, and that there's only one power that exists in and as all of life itself. It's expressed by you and it is by me, and that we both process and experience and express it through our thoughts, our beliefs, our actions, and our reactions in life, and that is because we live in a world that is governed by spiritual law. And so what all of that means is that we celebrate who you are and who you are as a being of the light itself. And no matter where you're at on the pathway of your finding your personal self-empowerment through a spiritual awakening, as our beloved David Walker used to say each and every Sunday morning, we welcome one and we welcome all. And so we begin our service every Sunday morning with a ritual. And that ritual is typically called the Flames of Faith, in its most traditional terms called calling in the light. And it's an opportunity to acknowledge the light that exists within each and every individual. It's going to have a little bit different components to it today for two reasons. One is because we're going to honor the light that is known as Nora Rose Hines. For many of you may know and many of you may not, one of our beloved spiritual family, Dr. James Mellon and his husband Kevin Bailey lost their beloved daughter Nora Hines this past week in a tragic car accident. And so knowing that we are all interconnected and that love is the self-forgiveness of spirit through which it expresses itself by means of each and every one of us, and that spirit that expresses through us is not bound by human form. We know for Nora that she's moving to the next dimension of her light and experiences and expresses the qualities of God, which are known as peace, power, beauty, joy, light, life, love, and wisdom. And in addition to that, we hold Kevin and James and Will, Nora's twin brother, and Pat and her wife, their mothers, in our hearts, and just know for them that during this tragic time that there's healing that takes place. Speaking of tragic times, the candle lighting that we're going to do today is honoring World AIDS Day, which took place yesterday. And so the process of our ritual, calling in the light, will be the same, but you will hear different languaging as our practitioner of the day, Tim Barber, takes us on that journey, and our illuminator, Olivia Luti, takes us through lighting the candles. So I invite both Tim and Olivia to the bema, and Andy will take us on the journey.
We perform this ceremony today to pause and acknowledge the horrific events in the lives that are the result of AIDS. We'll use this candle ritual to honor and acknowledge the universal consciousness of life, which exists in and as all peoples, all faiths, all sentient beings. We remember and we know that we all have come from one great universal presence, which we call Spirit, made in its image. We use this ritual as a conduit for healing, a remembrance of those who have passed, and a deep knowing that good is present and transcendent of experience in all who are here. As Olivia lights the first candle, let's pause to remember those who were taken far too soon by a virus that has taken far too many. The second candle is lit so that we honor those who have been living with HIV for decades, and we are thankful that they are still with us. We also take this moment to wish them many, many more years of vigor and health and abundant happiness. For the third candle, let's pause to think of those who have been living with HIV for only a few years, months, weeks, or days. May they have access to the best possible health care. May they respond well to the treatments that are available and experience the love, acceptance, and empathy of all of us. As Olivia lights the fourth candle, let's pause to bless those of us who have lost loved ones to HIV/AIDS or who have been in any way impacted by HIV. Let's wish them comfort and peace. We light the fifth candle so that we may pause and give thanks for those who continue to care for people with HIV, who work to find better treatments, vaccines, and even a cure, who work to make good health care more affordable, more accessible, and who work to educate the public on this issue. The sixth candle is lit so that we may pause to recall that AIDS is still with us. And while it is with us, we all have AIDS. If not in our physical body, in our compassionate hearts, as we are all interconnected. As Olivia lights the seventh candle, let's envision a miraculous day when HIV/AIDS is only a memory. The eighth candle Olivia lights is known as the healing candle. We ask you to take a moment to think of anyone that you, including those we've already mentioned, including Nora and James and Kevin and Will, or anyone suffering from any reason. Include them in the healing power of your thoughts. Put them in the light of a healing flame to experience the eternal and everlasting love of the divine.
I am love. I am peace.
I am peace.
In my heart.
In my heart.
I am free.
I am free.
I am spirit.
I am spirit.
I am soul.
I am soul.
All together.
All together.
We are whole. Calling in the light. Calling in the light. Calling in the light of love. Calling in the light. Calling in the light. Calling in the light of love. And so it is. And so it is. And so it is.
Let's take one more moment to have a spiritual mind treatment. Let's know again that there's only one force in the universe that made and makes and continues to reinvent everything, including us, in its image. Because we exist, we have the intelligence and the power to surmount any crisis, any hardship. We have the tools to put our thoughts in clear order, knowing the highest and best good for anything we witness or hear of. We know that our thoughts generate the words and deeds that create a healed, thriving, safe, fertile, productive, loving place for each and every person on the planet. We vow to use those thoughts and words and deeds in only that way, knowing that only good can come from it. We let that word go, knowing it's carved out something that cannot be erased. And together we say, so it is.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you, Olivia, and thank you, Andy, and thank you, all of you. You can feel the energy that's shifted in here, but it's an energy of calm and peace and healing as well, right? So I'm personally so very happy to have our musician here with us today. He always brings such light and joy and depth and talent here, and he's just an exceptional musician and a great pleasure to work with, right, Andy?
Yes, sir.
And so I bring to the BEMA with great pride and welcoming and Harold Payne with Andy Belling.
It's a pleasure to work with this incredible musician here who's got a fantastic feel and great sound as well. In the midst of chaos, I see a ray of hope. A coming together of unprecedented scope. A return to oneness and compassion. With simple kindness is a first reaction. Where our rancor is released, this is a call to peace. There have been times when we've been tested, felt isolated, disconnected. We are stronger than our fears, and the future's brighter than it appears. We can build on our common beliefs. This is a call to peace. It's a call to peace. It's a call to love. It's a call to the greatness we're all made of. It's a call to peace. It's a call to love. You're my brother and my sister, and we all know there's a bond between us that we can't let go. I'll hear your truth, and you hear mine, and we'll respect each other till we find that all bitterness can simply cease. This is a call to peace. It's a call to peace. Oh, it's a call to love. It's a call to the greatness we're all made of. call to peace. It's a call to love. It's a call to peace. Oh, it's a call to love. It's a call to the greatness we've all made of. It's a call to peace. It's a call to love.
Harold Payne, everyone, with Andy Belling. Harold Payne. So beautiful. Thank you, Harold. And I love your music. It's so simple and yet so deep and profound and quite artistic. So thank you. Thank you. So today I want to begin as we can feel our energies really moving in this room. And obviously there's some somber energy from the news that was shared earlier. And we are kicking off a new theme, which I'll address in a moment. But I'd like to begin with an audio that is going to be played for you that I've chosen for us. So I invite you to listen to this with open ears.
There's an African-American song, 19th century, which is so great. It says, when it looked like the sun was not shining anymore, God put a rainbow in the clouds. Imagine. And I've had so many rainbows in my clouds. I had a lot of clouds, but I have had so many rainbows. And one of the things I do when I step up on the stage, when I stand up to translate, when I go to teach my classes, when I go to direct a movie, I bring everyone who has ever been kind to me with me. Black, white, Asian, Spanish-speaking, Native American, gay, straight, everybody. I say, come with me. I'm going on the stage. Come with me, I need you now. Long dead. You see? So I don't ever feel I have no help. I've had rainbows in my clouds. And the thing to do, it seems to me, is to prepare yourself so that you can be a rainbow in somebody else's cloud. Somebody who may not look like you, may not call God the same name you call God, if they call God at all. You see? I may not eat the same dishes prepared the way you do, may not dance your dances, or speak your language, but be a blessing to somebody. That's what I think.
Be a blessing to somebody, Maya Angelou tells us. To be a rainbow in someone's cloud. I think today that as we've heard this news of the passing of Nora, and whether we knew Nora or not, or even whether or not we know James and Kevin and the family, we know what the feeling of loss is like, each and every one of us and us collectively. That when loss transpires, that we are oftentimes racked with grief. And we begin to ask the questions of why? Why? Why did this happen? Who allowed this to happen? What caused it to happen? And yet, as we continue to find our personal self-empowerment through a spiritual awakening, there is the intention for each and every individual to build this depth of faith within our soul to know how to navigate that which is unexplainable and unfathomable at times in life. And if we choose to know on the journey of life, of finding that personal self-empowerment through a spiritual awakening, to be the rainbow in someone's cloud, and those that we are interconnected with, which are all, are also being a rainbow in our clouds, we learn how to use the clouds when they show up. This month's theme is the pathway of illumination. Building on September's theme of fulfilling life's desires, October's living from your awakened self, closing out November last week of staying present in the presence, we now move into the pathway of illumination. So I invite you to open yourself up this morning and throughout this month to hear not only something anew in regards to the pathway of illumination, but something that sparks within you a greater commitment and covenant to yourself and with yourself, and an awareness to living an awakened self on the pathway of illumination. My objective and my goal this month is to address it from what is the pathway of illumination? How do we live on it and stay on it? And why does it matter? The pathway of illumination. And so let's break it down. And you know I like to break it down. So let's break it down and look at the words. Well, what is a pathway? Well, a pathway as a noun is a way that constitutes or serves as a path. Now, you hear our vision statement every Sunday of we are here to support individuals finding their personal self-empowerment through a spiritual awakening. And when we look at that spiritual awakening as a path, the journey that we're on, then it gives us the opportunity to ask ourselves, how are we both showing up for that journey? Are we indeed becoming empowered? And indeed, are we awakened? I saw this quote just a moment ago as Harold was singing, that with you is the fount of life, and by your light do we see light. That's the same concept that Maya Angelou was telling us, is that it's by allowing the fountain of life that is within us, which is our light, and when that light shines out from us, do we see the inherent light that exists within all. That's the illumination that we're talking about, and to know that we don't have to do anything for that light to shine. Yet there's so much we can do, should we choose to do it, for that light to not only get brighter from within, but in so doing, that it emblazons that which is in front of us, illuminating the pathway before us, so that the light is prevalent as opposed to the opposite of light, which is darkness. Illumination is the light that is thrown on and reflected from an object which allows us to see it. Illumination is generally thought of as referring to the visible part of the electromagnetic spectrum, but can also be both infrared and ultraviolet light. In other words, the illumination is not only lighting the pathway for us, but it is giving light to that which we are seeing, reflecting it back to us. And so I invite you today to give yourself permission to open your mind, to let go of what was, let go of what is to be, and let yourself choose to see life in a new way. To see life both from it in physical form, that is animated by the principle of being, as we know in metaphysics when we use that, referencing that definition and the quality. But also when we are encumbered with or dealt a blow that causes us to grieve that which was. And so I'm going to begin by reading to you a blog that was written by my dearly beloved soul brother, Jim Lockard, that many of you know, that I think will help us frame how we choose to be on the pathway of illumination when that which we seem to be experiencing in life is contrary to that which we know to be as the divine. In his recent post, he wrote this: "Lessons from the death of my child." He writes, "Don't surrender your grief so quickly. Let it pierce the soul. Let it wail and crack open wide the disbelief, allowing its searing tears to stain your face. Something is missing in my heart tonight. It has made my gentle eyes soft with sorrow, while my angry voice turns into a whispered prayer, and my tender need of absolution so clear." By Joseph Francis Orgazzi. Dr. Jim wrote in regards to chronicling the death of his child this: "Two of my colleagues in ministry have experienced the death of young adult children in the past couple of weeks." One he's referencing is James and Kevin. "One is eerily like my own experience of the loss of my precious daughter, Caitlin, on Easter Sunday, 2008, to a tragic car accident. Like Caitlin, my friend's daughter was under 20 with what was surely to be an amazing life ahead of her. Needless to say, these events have brought up feelings and memories for me as I grieve their losses and, once again, my own. I am reminded that grief does not end. It lies beneath the surface at times, but it can be awakened at any moment. So, I moved to write this, my most personal blog entry to date. He writes, I have only partial episodic memories of the 3 weeks in 2008, beginning just before midnight on the eve of Easter Sunday, California time, when my daughter, Heather, called me from her mom's home in Fort Lauderdale. It was already after midnight in Florida where Caitlin had just died. I remember those first few hours, crying off and on as I called people, my wife, Dorianne, who was writing in our cabin in Montana and unreachable at that hour, my ministerial partner at the time, Dr. Sue Rubin, to tell her of the news, pray, and arrange for her to do the Sunday service alone, to call Delta Airlines, where the person who took my call put me on hold while she cried and spoke to her supervisor so that we could transfer the airline tickets we had purchased to attend Caitlin's high school graduation, which was to take place in just 6 weeks, all to be done without any fees. And then I called my friend Steve for a ride to LAX very early on a Sunday morning. If I called anyone else, I actually don't remember. Of the 3 weeks in Fort Lauderdale which followed, I remember staying with my dear friend Charles, making arrangements with the Neptune Society, bits of 2 very large memorial services, some connection with friends and family, and a few other things, but not very much. I realize now what I was doing was grieving, and that was, for me, a period of sadness and numbness. Along the way, there was anger, despair, more anger, resignation, more anger, some sadness, and much more. And the gradual realization that this had really happened, and that my beautiful daughter was gone, and that my life would never be the same. Memories had to be restructured and given new meaning. Future plans and idealizations were now erased. Joan Didion put it well. Grief turns out to be a place none of us know until we reach it. We anticipate, we know, that someone close to us could die, but we do not look beyond the few days or weeks that immediately follow such an imagined death. We misconstrue the nature of even those few days or weeks. We might expect that if the death is sudden, to feel shock. We do not expect the shock to be obliterative, dislocating to both body and mind. We might expect that we will be prostrate, inconsolable, crazy with loss. We do not expect to be literally crazy, cool customers who believe that their husband is about to return and need his shoes. In the version of grief we imagine, she writes, this model will be healing. A certain forward movement will prevail. The worst days will be the earliest days. We imagine that the moment to most severely test us will be at the funeral, after which this hypothetical healing will take place. When we anticipate the funeral, we wonder about failing to get through it, rise to the occasion, exhibit the strength that invariably gets mentioned as the correct response to death. We anticipate needing to steel ourselves for the moment. Will I be able to greet people? Will I be able to leave the scene? Will I be able even to get dressed that day? We have no way of knowing that this actually will not be the issue. We have no way of knowing that the funeral itself will be anodyne, a kind of narcotic regression in which we are wrapped in the care of others and the gravity and meaning of the occasion. Nor can we know ahead of the fact, and here lies the heart of the difference between grief as we imagine it and grief as it actually is, the unending absence that follows, the void, the very opposite of meaning, the relentless succession of moments during which we will confront the experience of meaninglessness itself. That's a lot to take in, right? Dr. Jim goes on to write, a big lesson I learned through my spiritual philosophy, the science of mind, which I had been studying for nearly 20 years at that point, was that if I trusted spirit and my connection, my grief would have a bottom. I could allow myself to grieve deeply without fear that I would lose myself. This was very comforting in helping me through the process, which never ends, by the way, he writes. I also had spiritual support from colleagues, friends, family, and others. Spiritual maturity is the ability to face whatever comes along in life from a place of realization that it's all divine, meaning that much of what happens is a mystery. The why questions about people dying are ultimately unanswerable. There are aspects of reality at play for which we have no understanding. So, if I were to offer advice to anyone who is grieving the loss of a loved one or any other kind of loss, it would be this: let yourself grieve. Let yourself grieve. Your process will be unique in some ways and frustratingly comfortist in others. Be with it regardless. Remember, it has a bottom, but it never ends. The memorial service, he writes, the second of his tips, is not the hardest part. As difficult as that can be, the weeks that follow were a wasteland of numbness for me. Life had no flavor, no prospect of joy, as Joan Didion noted above. And after a few weeks, ready or not, people start expecting you to be normal again. The next part: there is no appropriate time for grieving to be over, but it should become manageable over time. If it doesn't, get some help. And the next that he wrote was, try to have compassion for those who try to comfort you, but do not know how. Next to losing my daughter, the most difficult part of the process was dealing with well-meaning but unskillful efforts to comfort me. Most of the time, the best thing to say to someone grieving is something like, I don't know what to say. Because more often than not, that is actually the truth. And of course, people are approaching a grieving person from their own fears of death, of inadequacy, of sorrow, of loss. The only answer is compassion. There is more to life than meets the eye, he writes. I've had experiences which point me to the realization that this experience of life isn't all there is. I don't pretend to have any details about what is beyond this experience and tend not to trust those who tell me they do. But there is more. Finally, he writes, show your love to those for whom you care. Not out of a sense of fear of loss, but rather out of a determination to live in greater joy. In other words, be a rainbow in someone's cloud. The pathway of illumination is what we're addressing today in this month. And I wanted us to look at the concept of grief, not just from the perspective of losing a loved one, but what I've learned along the way in the years that I've walked this path and in my awakening of my spiritual nature, hence finding my personal self-empowerment, is that there are times in life when things kick us in the butt. And yet, so often in metaphysics, we're taught that we're to pull ourselves up by the bootstraps and rise up and know the spiritual truth of what's going on. I had a phone call from someone this week who was in quite the distress on some levels regarding the death of our beloved Nora Rose Hines. And this is someone who's been trained in this teaching, and they kept saying, I know I'm supposed to have the spiritual answer, and yet fill in the blank. And my answer was, we can hold those components simultaneously. We can figure out what's going on for us and grieve the loss that is transpiring in our life. And the reality is that we're always experiencing loss. If it's not simply just the loss of a loved one, as you choose to purposefully and intentionally spiral up the spiral of conscious evolution into a higher vibrational frequency, you are losing that which is no longer that is equal or mirroring that which you are. And so loss is a part of the evolution of finding your spiritual awakening and becoming empowered. But yet, when it takes place in physical forms such as the loss of a loved one or a job or something regarding your health, it seems to hit us hard, and we think that we're supposed to rise above it. And we're not. We're not. What we're supposed to do is to bring our awakened self into that experience that's part of the pathway of our journey of finding our personal self-empowerment through a spiritual awakening, and bring our illumined self to that experience. The pathway of illumination. Dr. Holmes addresses illumination in this way. He says illumination is inspiration reaching a cosmic state. It's a direct contact with the reality of God, a complete intuitive perception. It is the self-knowingness of God through the human. Illumination comes as the human more and more and more realizes their unity with the whole. But since the whole is at the point of the inner mentality, it will be here, the inner mentality, that they will contact it. The only God, Ernest writes, the human will ever know is the God of their own inner life. So what he's telling us is that power that we call God, if you use that term, is not something that can be experienced by some external definition. It is something that can only be developed and nurtured through the inner communion with it. And each and every one of us will have the opportunity, and does have the opportunity as we navigate our life, to define for ourselves what that power is for us. So how do we develop that inner life? And what do we want to reflect as we do so? Well, in this concept, this is written, or regarding this concept, also in the book The Science of Mind by Ernest Holmes, and this is what is written. Great as the subconscious is, its tendency is set in motion by the conscious thought. And in this lies the possibility and the pathway to freedom. Now, let's substitute the word there, illumination, for freedom. Great as the subconscious is, its tendency is set in motion by the conscious thought. And in this lies the possibility of and the pathway of illumination. Illumination, right? Illumination and bondage, or he says freedom and bondage, sickness and health, illumination and darkness, poverty and riches, heaven and hell, good and bad, big and little, happiness and misery, peace and confusion, faith and fear, and all conditions which appear to be opposites are not really a result of the operation of opposing powers, but are the way the one power is used. What he's telling us here is that there is only one power. Now, our communion with that and how we define that power is done in the inner mentality of our own journey of life. And that how we choose to use that is how we then develop our state of mind, which shows up as heaven or hell, or good or bad, or big or little, or happiness or misery, or peace or confusion. Now, this concept for most of us in the room today is not a new concept. Do you guys agree with that? You know that. However, I want you to take this very moment and ask yourself, are you consciously aware of how you're using the one power right now in your life? And are you aware of how you use the one power when events like the death of a child or the deep pain that one experiences in life and the trajectory of grief that goes with this, what you believe to be true for you? It's in those moments when we're confronted, which oftentimes seems to be, once again, the unexplainable or the unfathomable, that we forget who we are. We forget where we are, and we forget from where we have come. But what's important to know is that inner mind that is part of the consciousness of all that is that one power does not have the capacity to forget. So we can lean into our grief and our pain and our sorrow and that which gives us fear in life, and call upon the depths of the foundation of the spiritual awakening that has taken place for each one of us and all of us collectively. And let that be the baseline from which we choose to move forward into our growth or our healing or our awakening. Spiritual awakening is our objective on the journey of life. Now, Reverend Michael Beckwith addresses that in different terminology, if you will, and he calls that journey, if you will, the realms of consciousness. And so this morning, I want to remind you, which we've gone over before, of those realms of consciousness as you and I are each choosing to awaken ourselves to committing to living our life, our pathway of life in an illumined state, to ask ourselves, where are we and where do we want to go? And to also ask ourselves, what in our lives has happened to us that we're still grieving or may not have fully finished grieving? I'll share with you, I was on the phone with a counselor this week that I was reaching out to, a minister, for dealing with a situation that came up for me. And she was so cute, and we were having a cute conversation about all of it. And she goes, so let's address this. And you and I know, she goes, what's taking place is that you got to grieve the event that happened itself. She goes, so let's go through the 7 steps and see how you are. And she rolled off step 1. I'm like, I got that. She goes, step 2, I got that. And she goes, step 3, it's anger. I'm like, that's the one I haven't worked with, right? I'm like, I'm still pissed, right? And it was like it triggered it. But what's so wonderful about that, which is the case for each and every one of us through life, is that we have the opportunity to be aware that we're aware of what's going on in our life. And so once that came up, I was so happy that through that process it came up, because I got aware of what I needed to work on for the healing to take place, because my pathway of life in regards to that situation was not the pathway of illumination. It was a pathway of darkness. But I knew I wanted it to be a pathway of illumination. So I also knew that the only way that could happen was for me to get my bloated ego out of the way and to reach out to someone that I trusted could guide me to the next step, and she did. But that can only happen if we have evolved, and I'm not speaking of myself with some empirical way of evolution. I just know that I've done the work to be able to know, to reach out and to do so. Meaning, where are you on the evolution of the realms of consciousness? The first state of the evolution is a consciousness of to me, which is known as a victim consciousness. It's believing that God is outside of me, making things happen in my life, testing, rewarding, and punishing me. I feel powerless. The next realm is the by me consciousness, not B-U-I, B-Y, okay? And this is how that's addressed. As I evolve from victimhood, I release blame, shame, and guilt. I learn that God is within me, and there is a law that I can use to effect changes and claim dominion over my life. I use this law effectively. I feel powerful. Spiritual mind treatment, affirmations, and visualizations are powerful spiritual practices in this realm, which then moves us to the fourth realm, which is through me. Continuing to evolve, I let go of control, which is a delusion anyway. I've learned to establish dominion over my life and have built strong life structures for myself. Now I realize that there is more to life than this. I surrender to Spirit and let it use me. As I surrender to the indwelling presence, it operates through me. I become its instrument. It might be noted here that if I do not willingly and intentionally surrender, Spirit might give me a little push or perhaps a big shove if that is necessary, and then the individual surrenders. While meditation and visioning are hallmarks at this point, spiritual mind treatment and other practices are still appropriate, which moves us then to the fourth realm of consciousness, which is as me. In the as me realm, I release the last vestiges of separation and realize complete identification with God. I know that I am it. Jesus was in the stage when he said, when they see me, they see he that sent me. And I and my Father are one. The realization form of spiritual mind treatment spontaneously happens, for we live in the awareness of the presence. Witness consciousness is natural to us, and we are aware of the divine witness beholding us. So I invite you to just ask yourself, where are you on that journey without any attachment? Most of us probably live between the by me and the through me stages with the desire and the hope to live in the as me stage. And it's important to know that as you move along the journey of life, there are times that you will move back and forth between all of it. But what we are talking about here today is the journey of you finding your personal self-empowerment through a spiritual awakening. And the way to travel this journey is indeed on a pathway. A pathway. But the question is, what kind of pathway? is a pathway where you're looking over your shoulder, hoping to reconfigure, re-experience, recreate something from the past? Or are you living in the future, hoping that you get to create or co-create something that has been a dream or a blessing, or even recreate from the past that is in the future? But it's important to know that neither one of those places are the places to be. The place to be is in the present moment. As Thich Nhat Hanh told us, and I shared last week, the present moment is the only moment available to us, and it is the door to all moments. The present moment is the only moment available to us, and it's the door to all moments. This is addressed from the Bible and the book, The Science of Mind, as well, in this way, that it's important for us in this very present moment to start fresh and start anew. In the book, The Science of Mind, this is written regarding the new cloth and old garments from the book of Matthew, in saying that no man puts a piece of new cloth on an old garment or new wine into old bottles. Jesus was teaching a lesson in religious or spiritual development. We are continuously living a new life, and when the old and the new do not fit nicely together, the old, being no longer able to contain the new, should be discarded. Continually, we must expect new revelations of old truths. We should never lose sight of the fact that the soul is on the pathway of an endless and ever expanding experience, and that only by expansion can it evolve. This does not mean that we should cast away any good the old has to offer, but that we convert it, the old, into greater good. Accepting the lessons and experiences of the past and taking the best from everything, we should press boldly forward, looking ever for the truth and ever ascending higher and higher into the heavens of reality. There is no limit to the possibility inherent in all humans. Let the timid soul put its complete trust in good and press bravely on. Today, as you awaken to choosing to be an illumined being on the pathway of illumination, I invite you and I encourage you to expect new revelations of old truths. We're being told already the soul is on this pathway, that which is deep within you, that is the resonance field of the divine. And we know already, as we've discussed over time here, that in the modern day world, we get to choose to be conscious evolutionists, to be conscious in how we're using our mind and our soul and our being to propagate the good in the world that already exists. And this can take place whether we're in grief or not. Because the law of attraction states that whatever you focus on, think about, read about, and talk about intensely, you're going to attract more of in your life. So I ask you today, what is it that you want more of? It might be something that is of a material. It might not. It might be more peace, more power, more beauty, more joy, more light, more life, more love, or wisdom in your life. It might be more compassion with the self or others. But just remember that the law of attraction states that whatever you focus on, think about, read about, and talk about intensely, you're going to attract more of that into your life. And so today, I invite you to see from within your soul rising up the illumined path before you. And ask yourself, what is it that you want to see that is a reflection of who you are? And to trust the timing of your life, to stay patient, to stay calm, to stay determined, to stay focused, and most of all, trust your journey, because it can be no one else's. Thank you. Thank you. Harold, welcome back. Harold Payne and Andy Belling, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, I picked a song and kind of rewrote a song that I thought was going to be about the talk. And I realized that it still is, other than because the title of the song is Grateful for the Tough Times. And as he was talking, I realized it's not being grateful for what happened, but grateful for what I learned about what happened. So.
Clouds will come and clouds will go, both darkness and light we will know. I will seek to live my life out loud and be a rainbow in someone else's cloud, and a pathway of illumination for others and myself. Grateful for the tough times, the feeling like I'm not enough times, when it seemed like the world is caving in on me. Oh, I'm grateful for the tough times, that's when your real stuff shines. Got to let it shine on through. Thinking back on all the challenges I've had, that's when I learned to make a good move on the bad, whatever I was going through. Somehow in my heart I knew, like time-released capsules of wisdom gained, something positive would come from the pain, the lessons to be learned. The bridges were tested, but never burned, and I'm grateful for the tough times, feeling like I've got enough time, when it seemed like the world caving in on me. Oh, I'm grateful for the tough times, real stuff shines. To let it shine on through. Every time I see a bump in the road, I think it must be something I need to know. Never thought I'd see it that way. It's a pretty cool mind game to play. I don't have to feel like a victim anymore. I can't wait to see what life has in store. I'm ready, bring it on. We'll turn it into a song. Oh, I'm grateful for the tough times, feeling like I've got enough time, when it seems like the world is caving in on me. Real stuff shines. Got to let it shine on through. There's a place in each of us where serenity dwells. We can find our way, we can find ourselves. That's why I'm grateful for the tough times, feeling like I'm not enough time, and it seems like the world is caving in on me. Oh, I'm grateful for the tough times, that's when your real stuff shines. Got to let it shine on through. Oh, got to let it shine on through.
Thank you.